Here we have the Lowenzahnhonig. I hope I'm pronouncing that correct, but it may be entirely incorrect. This is from WgdModular. If you're interested, Lowenzahnhonig appears to be, after about 1 minute of internet research, a form of dandelion honey that people sometimes make at home as a substitute for honey or syrup. So, first of all, WgdModular. They sell DIY PCBs and panels mainly. So you essentially buy a kit, and the kit is in the form of a panel, a PCB. The PCB is most often pre-populated, so that you can see the SMD components there are pre-populated. And you build the kit by soldering things like jacks, pots, power connectors, sometimes headers, sometimes LEDs. Fairly straightforward actually, because all the hard work's done for you, most of the hard work anyway, by using the pre-installed SMD components. I personally have a number of modules from WgdModular. So I have a quad LFO, I have a quad VCA, I have a low pass gate which I really like, and I also have this. So why is this module particularly special? Well, for me it's special because of this thing here, a daisy seed from Electrosmith. Those that have watched my channel before and seen other videos, you will probably notice that I do like programming microcontrollers and using them in Eurorack. Specifically, I've been focused on the EuroPi for a while. The EuroPi is fantastic, really good at being able to, or really useful to create things quickly because it uses the Python language. So EuroPi is fantastic for things like LFOs, sequencers, things like that. And as I said before, because you're using the Python language, you can get up and running really quickly and easily. The Daisy Seed, however, has a really good quality DAC on there. It's a little bit more powerful, and therefore you can use the Daisy Seed for audio applications. That means that you can basically write effects like reverb, delay, things like that, and it's in some cases a lot more powerful than the EuroPi platform. However, one drawback compared to EuroPi is you need to use C++ in order to write code for this. Setting up the development environment is a bit more tricky. You have to compile the code, you don't just copy scripts and edit them. And debugging is also a bit of a challenge because you need specialist hardware in order to debug, and even then debugging is still a little bit tricky. You don't quite get the same feedback and ability to, say, print variables very easily like you do with the EuroPi. However, Daisy Seed is incredibly powerful. Why I first of all know about the Daisy Seed and what drew me to it was it's used by a number of Eurorack modular makers already. So two notable ones. Noise Engineering use it for their Versio platform. I particularly love Desmodus Versio, for example. Also Qubit, they use this for at least for Databender, and I think they might use it for other modules as well. So it just shows you how powerful the Daisy Seed can be. The reason I'm making a video today on this module is because I've just written some custom firmware for the Daisy Seed. Now the firmware that I wrote is essentially a reverb effect, and honestly I'm absolutely loving it. I suspect that this will be the only reverb effect I have in my rack for a while, and one of the main reasons for that is when I started to write the software, the reverb effect, what I really wanted was the ability to dial the reverb down and then use it for things like drums and stringed instruments, but then also to be able to dial it right up and be able to get some really spacey, ethereal, sort of shimmer type reverb effects. And I'm pleased to say I managed to achieve both of those things. Additionally, I managed to implement CV control, so we can get some quite sort of special effects using this firmware and the CV control. So let's have a run through the functions of the firmware, and then we'll have a play and a listen. So the firmware I've written for this I'm calling Splooge Reverb, and it is a stereo reverb effect. So you can use both the left and the right inputs, and then of course that will come out of the left and right outputs. You can also use it in mono through a simple hardware mod. So this connection here is essentially normalizing the left input to the right input. So when there is no input plugged into the right input, it will be duplicated from the left. So essentially you can use it in mono mode or stereo mode. The controls. So on the top right you have wet and dry. So that controls basically in the middle it will be 50-50, all the way left 100% dry, all the way right 100% wet. This control here on pot 1 is the feedback for the reverb. So at lower levels just a little bit of feedback, and then as you ramp it up you get those long reverb tails. Pot 3 here is a tone control. So at the lower levels it is sort of a low pass filter on the reverb effect, and then as it goes past 12 o'clock it is a high pass filter with some additional drive, so it really boosts the treble tones, the higher frequencies. And finally on the right hand side, this is the splooge control. So this does a few different things. It has a delay line in there, it also has chorus, and it has pitch shift, and we can use this particular control with all the other controls to get some really nice variations of reverb. There are also two CV controls. So CV1 controls the tone control, and CV2 controls the splooge. So here we have plats in chord mode with a relatively fast sequence, and we have a slightly different setting on the module here. So about 60% on the reverb feedback, about 25% on the wet and dry, about 60% on the tone control, and then we have the splooge control quite high up. With the splooge control quite high and the feedback low, it's quite a subtle reverb. But as we crank the wet and dry up and the feedback up, we start to get really nice washes in the sound. So let's have a play around with a few different settings. In this patch I have a percussive sound coming from Platts here that's been randomly triggered, and also has a random voltage per octave sequence coming from Cellular Automata off screen here. And I love this patch because it sort of creates a nice spatial effect that's a little bit weird. It's almost like the reverb is coming in and out unexpectedly. So it's a relatively tame patch. So we have the feedback quite high. We have the wet dry about 60%. We have the tone about 25%, and then we have the splooge around about 20-25% as well. And the source of uncertainty here is sending steps random to the tone control, and we can hear when that's high, it's essentially increasing the tone and then coming straight back down again. Let's have a listen and play with some controls. So in this very quick patch, I'm demonstrating something with a strong impulse, essentially noise, two different frequencies of noise coming here through a VCA into the module. And we can get an almost room type reverb, and we can control two key parts of that room. We can control the size of the room using the reverb feedback, and we can control the materials in the room using the tone controls. Let's have a play with this one. Time for something a little bit different. Here I've just got a drone coming in from a square wave oscillator, and I'm just going to play around with the different settings to get a feel for the different texture elements that you can add to just a simple sound like a drone. Here we have a field recording of some bird song and some just air movement in general, really, while I was walking around. I think we can get some interesting effects with this one. Let's have a play. Let's try some other samples. Here I have some poker chips being dropped. Next, let's try some drums. Okay, totally dry. That sounded cool. And finally, let's try some guitar through it. Lowenzahnhonig, I still don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, from WgdModular. I am really pleased that this module came out. It allows me to develop firmware and play around with the Daisy seed and get up and running really quickly. Secondly, I am really pleased with the way my Splooge firmware or Splooge Reverb firmware came out, and it has definitely inspired me to play around with the Daisy seed more. I expect I'll be releasing some different types of firmware in a not too distant future. So thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.